bottom of it all is the Consumer Protection Act, which has a mandate to not only protect the consumer, but also look to each of these regulatory bodies and say, what have you done or not done to ensure consumer protection? What went wrong? So the other definition that I thought was important, because it comes within that context of food control, which is food safety. Hopefully none of you have that tomorrow or within 6 hours, a bit of stomach cramp, a bit of nausea, but usually with bulk catering that often happens, okay? But our responsibility in relation to legislation is to ensure that food will not cause harm to the consumer when eaten or drunk according to its intended use. Okay? So if anybody takes away a bakkie with some food from the buffet and takes it home and eats it later or keeps it in their car, that's not the intended use. So you cannot go to the Consumer Protection Act and say, I went to a conference at Empress organized by the NTSF and I got sick from the food there. Because you didn't eat it according to the intended use. Let's say, for example, this presenter only had 20 minutes to eat. Huh? And so she should have taken a bakkie quickly and just kept something on the side. No. But I'm giving you examples of the practicalities of what we have to deal with. The same thing with your KFC or your McDonald's. And I've seen a lot of government officials here, so that's why I'm mentioning this. The Treasury instruction for cost containment is you go to a hotel and you also book dinner. And then it's usually a buffet. Or you do a takeaway and you can't eat it all, so you take it up to your room. Most rooms don't have fridges. Most rooms don't have microwaves. Microorganisms grow between 5 and 60 degrees. That's their danger zone. Ambient temperature is usually 25 degrees. So you're putting yourself at risk. Okay. Now to the legislation, the actual stuff I was asked to talk about. Our Act 54 of 1972 controls the sale, manufacture, importation and exportation of foodstuffs, cosmetics and disinfectants. Now you heard about stuff in cosmetics, you heard about stuff in disinfectants. I'm putting the disclaimer here. That's the Act. I only deal with foodstuffs. I can't help you with cosmetics, I can't help you with disinfectants, but I can tell you who can. So we only administer the foodstuffs. The actual importation of foodstuff is dealt with by National Port Health, and the enforcement of the manufacturing, sale and export of foodstuffs is done at municipal level, but at the metro and district municipal level. So there's 52 of those. It's not in the 220 something local municipalities. It used to be. And we have approximately 50 sets of regulations, which I'm trying to rationalize since having been put in charge of this Act since 2016. In summary, what it aims to do, ensure that nothing may be detrimental or harmful to health in relation to foodstuffs, endeavors to protect consumers from exploitation by false or misleading claims, and it attempts to provide consumers with information to do what? To make informed and healthy choices. It places the onus on the manufacturer, seller, server, storer, whatever the case might be, if you go back to that definition, and the importer to comply. So it's not like medicines, where before you can put it on the market, you must register. In this Act, you can put anything on the market and you will be checked on at a later stage. And that's what the law enforcer does. At some stage, he checks whether your product complies. Then it also has a section around trademarks, in that it is a prohibitive act. Okay, so it has prohibitions within it. So in relation to trademarks, you may not falsely describe the nature and the origin and the contents of a product. So why is that a false description of a product? It doesn't contain all the stuff that Prof spoke about just now. It's diet water. You won't die from it. It hasn't been packaged by Rand Water. It says, yeah, it implies that normal water is full of calories. That's what that one implies. Is that not misleading? Because water is water. We all need it to sustain life. Then, Minister also has the power to prescribe as well as restrict issues. So this comes in terms of labeling, and that brings us closer to nutrition. What the format of a label should be, the appearance and the size of letters, what can be exempted from having a label. We also make allowances for the unavoidable presence of foreign substances. So for example, in nutrition, allergens, some allergens can make somebody sick, and heavy metals. We don't really want to have them in the human body, but by virtue of them being there in the periodic table, 150 of them, they are around us, so they will also get into our food. You've heard fertilizers have them, the soil has them. So therefore we have regulations that specify the minimum, should I say, the maximum amount that may be present in a foodstuff. Okay? We also have provisions to allow ministers to make standards for composition, strength, purity and quality. We have standards for foodstuffs. We have standards for premises on which those foodstuffs are manufactured, stored, sold, etc. And we have standards for persons that work on those premises. That they must be adequately trained, that they must know about hygiene, all of those kinds of things. So what are the legislative approaches to support nutrition under the framework of that Act? We have regulations for food safety, foodstuffs and premises, as I've said, nutritional composition and labeling, and then health and nutrition outcomes, following those scope of the Act. And I'm going to unpack each of them as we go through it. So legislation is in support of good nutrition, which is what the WHO wants us to have, and positive optimum health outcomes, because we also saw poor nutrition leads to poor health outcomes. And the vision of the Department of Health is a long and healthy life for all. So where do we look at food safety, risk to human health? We have a number of biological safety or microbiological safety regulations. The first one I've put there is foods for infants, children and young children. Why would you think that's a risk to human health? What are foods for infants? Formula, NAN, S26, infant formula, breast milk substitutes. Why would they be a risk to human health? Because they contribute to that under 5 diarrhea in poverty conditions. You don't prepare them right, if the water's not safe and adequate. And if we have poor education, you don't really know how to actually make the formula up. But what then has it substituted? Something as natural as breast milk. So we shouldn't be replacing that. So that's the risk to human health. The infant should be receiving that as a sole form of nutrition for their first 6 months of life. Then there are the complementary foods. What do you add after that 6 months? And then the young children. Why do you need to have a growing up milk? Why do you need to have a follow-on formula when milk is cow's milk is just as good for them? So those are the aspects that is covered in those regulations. The other aspect of formula is that something that industry cannot get rid of in formula is 2 pathogens. One is Enterobacteria Sakazaki, and the other one is Bacillus cereus. But in the levels that are found in formula, it's not a risk. It's only if it's not appropriately looked after that it becomes a risk. But the Enterobacter sakazaki must be controlled through how you use the infant formula. Okay. Then we have hygienic food preparation, all the aspects relating to a premises that makes food. The street food vendor, the manufacturer that makes the bottled water or the packaged water on your table, the multinational that made Enterprise Polony, the multinational that makes infant cereals. We have regulations in place to cover that whole train of different types of food manufacturers or processors. And it's one regulation. So it requires the law enforcer to utilize his aspect of checking what are the hazards and what is the likelihood that that hazard will go into the food. Okay. So we have hygiene regulations. They've been in existence since 1999. We republished in 2012 and we republished last year, the updated versions. We have another acronym called Hyssop, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point Regulations. And this is about looking at the hazards and then creating a food safety management system to control those hazards. Okay? We have not enacted it on all food manufacturers. We are doing it incrementally. And we've listed peanut butter manufacturers, peanut graders and sorters because of the problem of aflatoxin in those products, as well as more recently last year, and it took effect on the 14th of March, the Hyssop regulation being applicable to meat and chicken processors. So anyone who makes a polony, Vienna, anything that's regarded as a processed meat product that is ready to eat. Okay. Then we also look at irradiation. So that's another chemical activity that happens to reduce microbiological loads or for agricultural purposes to take out a pest or reduce a pest. And then we also set microbiological criteria. And these, of course, are also risk-based. Chemical safety regulations. We have a regulation for heavy metals. I can't remember when it was first published, but it was updated in 2018 to bring it in line with the Codex Alimentarius. The 2007 incident with the cadmium in pineapples. It exceeded our local level, which means it also exceeded the EU level. But if we had to then say all those farmers in the Eastern Cape where these pineapples were being grown, stop production because you used a fertilizer that had too much cadmium in it, we would have wiped out an industry and we would have wiped out jobs. So what we did was looked at a risk assessment of the level of cadmium that was found based on exposure. So you look at the hazard, the amount of cadmium in the pineapple, the exposure, how much would you need to eat for that level to be toxic in your body. And based on that, we were able to relax the level for cadmium to allow this industry to continue without causing harm to human consumers. Because you would need to eat a can of pineapple every day for you to reach those toxic levels of cadmium for chronic exposure. Okay? Because remember, heavy metal is not immediate acute toxicity. It's a long-term exposure that you have a problem with. So that's why we were able to relax it for 3 years, and it gave the opportunity for that soil to then be, what do you call it? Where's my agricultural guys? Free time. Yeah.
Produce again.
Free time, yeah. But to allow that soil to regenerate, I will just say regenerate in my head. Yeah. They know what you're talking about. Then we also have regulations for packaged waters. So the product on your desk is not a Rand water product. It's a product that some or other company has decided to go into business. And I think it's called a natural spring water. So they even have found a source, a water source, where they then pull the water out from the groundwater or that spring, and then they bottle it. And they can call it natural spring water. But the others come like Bon Aqua, Nestle's one. Those are called prepared waters. Why? Because they've taken normal tap water and put it through some or other what I would put in inverted commas, purification process, either reverse osmosis or something like that. Okay, so the place around the corner where you go with your bottle and you then fill it up, that's also prepared waters. The premium ones are the ones that they want to call natural or spring water, but there are specific requirements in these regulations of which one you can call it. And of course, the spring water is going to be more expensive than the prepared water. It should be. Let me say it should be. I don't know. So we specify the types of water, what should be on a label, and then we also require testing. So if you look at that label, there are different chemicals on there that should have been tested, and therefore they have the levels also provided on the label. Then we also look at a regulation on mycotoxins. This was also updated fairly recently, owing to alignment with the Codex Alimentarius. We only had levels for aflatoxin in the past, and now we've broadened it to include the other ones that affect maize, your DON, patulin in fruit juices. There's one also in coffee, and I forget the name. Then we also look at radionuclides. Somebody mentioned radioactivity being a problem. So we also have regulations to deal with that. We have regulations around additives, preservatives, all those things that are in the label, the list of ingredients, the ones that are in either E number or something. There's only certain preservatives and additives we require the correct name to be put on, as well as some colorants like tartrazine. Then we also conduct the toxicological assessment of pesticides. So prior to the registration process under Act 36 of a pesticide, we look at the tox dossiers to determine whether the pesticides would have any endocrine disruption characteristics, would they have any carcinogenicity potential, and what that is. And then we then confirm with the registrar for Act 36, yes or no, in terms of the registration. And as mentioned, we also confirm the efficacy MRLs. The efficacy MRLs is what's left on the residue that's left on the plant, the maximum residue level that may be present on a plant that is left after the farmer has sprayed or used a pesticide. And by the way, when I use the word pesticides, that's why it's in inverted commas, it covers all aspects as defined under that act. Whether it's a herbicide, whether it's a fungicide, whether it has whatever property it has, it's all grouped under the word pesticides. Once we've confirmed the MRLs, because what we do is they provide us with the MRL. This is what is left after we've used the pesticide to kill off whatever it was wanting to be killed off. Will this pose a risk to human health? We then do an exposure assessment. How much of that commodity are we eating in the country? And what is the toxic dose for that? And somebody then looks at that and then confirms yes, no. And by and large, most of our pesticides are, the most I've seen is at 20% of the toxic dose, okay, the chronic toxic dose. And we then base it on the whole food basket of those commodities. So if they have the MRL, if they have the active ingredient being used on a basket of food items, we then look at it in totality. Okay. We also review the safety assessment of GMOs before approval. Okay. And we have labeling regulations, but they are positive regulations. Proactive regulations. They are not reactive, which is what the consumer protection is. This is only invoked when, because of the genetic modification, it might mislead the consumer. Maybe maize that they're always known to be white is now yellow, so they need to know that it's because of genetic modification. Whether the nutritional content has increased and what that nutritional content is, whether the composition has changed, and whether there's any potential allergen. Okay, so we look at those aspects in relation to it, and then we invoke the labeling provisions as applicable. And thus far, we've only had to do due to a higher level of some of the B vitamins.